So should billionaires exist, Christine? I think that's the
Well,
billion-dollar question.
the billion. Good one, Ben. Well, you've kind of touched on this before, I think in a video of ours.
I mean, I think I kind of got in trouble, or I saw some criticism of something I said in a Simply Nailogical video, where basically I think we were briefly having a conversation about a wealth tax. Somehow that came up while we were, eating nail polish, or you were painting my nails.
Yep.
And I would just ask people to kind of keep in mind when we're having conversations in Simply Nailogical videos and you're seeing like
4 minutes.
Quick jump cut, like 30 seconds of a conversation instead of like the 5-10 minute conversation you had. Like, of course, it's not a nuanced conversation about something,
and
right?
of course it's kind of quick and doesn't have the full context. And I probably cut it just to something that sounded out of place, like on purpose, because that's kind of how my Simply Nailogical videos go.
Yeah, so I think I said something along the lines of, I think I advocated that I thought a wealth tax made sense, which is fine. But I made some comment about how I had a bigger issue, and this is related to wealth tax. I had a bigger issue with people who have inherited vast amounts of money, as opposed to a guy who created an Amazon or PayPal and all of a sudden got hundreds of millions of dollars that way. I'm not saying in either case it's a good thing that we have such income inequality in our country, but I still think I hold by that point, though. I think there is a huge problem where you have such vast amounts of wealth in the US and Canada, around the world, that are concentrated in these families, like these oligarchies, where someone's great-great-grandfather happened to be the guy who started working in the oil and gas sector like 100 or 150 years ago. And for that reason, all of his like generations after him are the people with like an enormous amount of influence on politics, just because of how much money they have and how much they can donate to the causes or lobby governments to do what
and
they want.
They aren't paying as much in taxes to their governments and back to society, because that inheritance is not an income, right? So the people maybe who made the exact same amount as an income, they're paying way more back in taxes.
Well, yeah, I'm not a tax expert, despite
but just like on the whole,
jokes.
Very high level, that's kind of also
There are inheritance tax. We should be careful. There are.
Sorry, I'm not saying there's not. It's just not as much as someone who earned the same amount as like a salary.
Sure, and I guess the issue is what you see is people with a lot of money, more money than us. Like I'm talking like amazing amounts of wealth, have teams of people dedicated to their personal and corporate taxes and figuring out ways not of paying tax.
Tax avoidance.
And that's why you hear these crazy headlines, or see these crazy headlines about Amazon paid no tax, or X corporation made hundreds of millions of dollars and paid no tax.
Because their holding company is in Ireland or whatever.
They're using shell companies, they're writing off losses, they're doing all sorts of crazy things. Even the charitable giving stuff, like we joke about, we don't do this, but there are tricky, dubious legal ways of inflating the value of your charitable giving to give yourself like a bigger write-off than you should be getting. For example, like let's say you're donating artwork to a museum because you're some billionaire. You could have bought that artwork for $100,000, but you get someone to appraise it for $1 million. You donate it to a museum, and then you get $1 million tax write-off. You know, there's all sorts of weird, tricky ways of not paying tax, really.
Essentially scamming.
And the tax code in general is just so incredibly complicated. It's propped up this entire industry of like corporate tax lawyers and accountants who have to be familiar with these bizarre laws that we have to pay, and they only really exist because the tax code is so complicated. So I feel like we're sort of due for the reform of taxes in general. Like, I don't know, this is taking more of a tax turn than I thought, but like I thought a lot of people really responded to like Andrew Yang being in the last he running for the Democratic presidential nominee in the States in this still current election cycle, I guess. And I think he's just like 10, 15 years ahead of his time, maybe. I think 10 years from now, we're going to be having conversations about all the things he was trying to raise now. The automation of people's jobs away, the way we have to supplement, people's income, or like a universal basic income. Yeah. Or what I think might even be, I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but from what I've heard of economists who seem to be very smart and have thought about this issue, I think a negative income tax is a thing that could actually work.
What does that
So the
mean?
same way we have like a progressive income tax, like the more you
Yeah.
make, the more tax you pay. It just means right now that line sort of ends at if you make under a certain amount, you don't have to pay taxes.
Oh,
it just means it goes
you should get a
down
credit.
and you actually
Yeah.
get a credit if you make under that base amount. So like a universal basic income, for example, would just give anyone, regardless of how much they make, $1,000 a month or something like that. But that includes like
The people who don't need it.
CEOs of banks would also be getting that. And then it just gets taxed back at the end of the year. I think the issue with that, and like a lot of psychological research has shown this, that people hate giving up the money they have
Yeah.
more than, that con outweighs the benefit of receiving the money in the first place. So you'd be better off not giving those money in the people those money in the first place just to take it away. You'd be better off only giving money back to people in a way that's tested that they actually need the money in the first place.
So let's tie this back to should billionaires exist? And since they do exist now, what is the way out of their existence?
Throw them in the ocean.
No, Ben. There are billionaires currently.
You gotta
You
swim
can't just
with the
snap your
fishes.
fingers and they don't exist.
And yeah, I don't think it's kind of a stupid question in a way, because it's not that billionaires shouldn't exist. It's that we shouldn't have an economic system that lets someone become a billionaire while their employees are reliant on food stamps.
I think that's a really good way to put it. Because it's not just outright like no one should have X amount of money. It's what are they doing to get that money and who are they using to help them get there. And that is really sad when you see a company with such a disparity within the company. Like those people collectively, whether at different times, yes, obviously there was like a CEO who started it from the ground up. I'm not saying that they should all get paid the same rate. Obviously there's going to be differences in the hierarchy. But to see such wide gaps within companies is sad, yeah. And that's kind of the hard reality. Maybe that's how people should look at it rather than just write off billionaires overall.